Hello, my dear adventurer. Settle in now. Let your shoulders soften and your breath grow slow and steady. Feel the weight of the day loosen its hold, like a cloak slipping gently from tired shoulders. Tonight, beneath a sky brushed with winter clouds and painted in pale silvers and quiet blues, we begin a tale of wandering magic, unexpected snow, and the kind of warmth that finds you when you least expect it. It is not a tale of roaring battles or clashing steel, but of small surprises and the quiet courage required to step forward when the path disappears beneath your feet. Our story opens in the quiet harbour town of Saltmere, where gulls drift lazily over grey waters and wooden docks creak in a sleepy rhythm that has not changed in generations. The tide rolls in and out with patient devotion, brushing barnacled posts and whispering secrets to the hulls of resting ships. Nets hang like tired curtains from wooden beams, and coils of rope lie neatly stacked, smelling of brine and long voyages. The air carries the faint scent of salt and tar and distant hearth smoke, rising from cottages that lean companionably against one another. It is the sort of morning that promises nothing dramatic at all. The sky is a pale wash of cloud, neither bright nor threatening, and the world feels suspended in a soft, thoughtful pause. Silas Barrow stood at the end of the pier, burgundy velvet coat fluttering gently in the harbour breeze. The coat had seen better days, threadbare at the elbows, faded along the seams, and patched in places with fabric that did not quite match. But it was soft, familiar, and comforting in its own way. It carried the memory of tavern laughter, of long roads walked beneath starlight, of narrow escapes and quieter returns. He rested one boot against a piling and watched the tide move in its slow, thoughtful rhythm, as if the sea itself were considering something important. His dark hair stirred in the wind, and his expression hovered somewhere between curiosity and mild skepticism, as though he had agreed to something delightful and possibly foolish. Beside him stood Theo Silverquill, elven mage of distinguished posture and immaculate robes. His garments were layered in shades of frost blue and pearl, embroidered with silver thread that caught even the faintest light. Not a single crease disturbed their elegant fall. His hair, pale as moonlight on snow, was tied neatly at the nape of his neck with a ribbon the colour of deep winter twilight. He radiated calm confidence as he explained, in smooth melodic tones, the delicate art of translocation magic, how space was less a fixed distance and more a polite suggestion, how the world could be persuaded rather than forced to fold gently in on itself. Silas listened with half an ear, content to let the elf's words drift past like wind through rigging. Theo's voice rose and fell like a lullaby for scholars, full of careful phrasing and precise terminology. Silas nodded at appropriate moments, though his thoughts wandered toward simpler matters, like whether Shipwreck Cove truly existed in the way maps claimed, and whether the Serpent's Hoard was more than a sailor's fantasy told over mugs of dark ale. What mattered was simple. Theo believed he could open a portal to Shipwreck Cove, where rumour whispered of the Serpent's Hoard, lost pirate gold sleeping beneath stone arches and brine, guarded perhaps by nothing more dangerous than time and tide. If there was treasure to be found, Silas was willing to tolerate a lecture on arcane geometry. The morning felt peaceful, predictable, harmless. A fisherman coughed somewhere behind them. A rope tapped rhythmically against a mast. Even the gulls seemed disinclined to argue. It was the kind of quiet that makes bold plans feel almost reasonable. Theo lifted his hands and began the spell. Light gathered between his fingers, soft at first, like breath on a window pane, then brighter, like starlight caught in glass. The air shimmered gently, bending as though warmed by invisible flame. Frost traced delicate patterns along the dockboards, a thin lace of ice spreading outward in intricate designs that resembled leaves and feathers. Magic hummed through the grain of wood and bone alike. The sound was not harsh, but resonant, like a distant bell echoing across a valley, low and steady and impossibly clear. The harbour seemed to lean closer. Even the tide paused its restless murmur. The circle of light before them deepened to shades of blue and silver, swirling in slow, hypnotic motion. Its edges glowed like winter aurora, alive with subtle flickers of pale green and soft violet. Within its centre, shapes moved indistinctly, as if another sky waited just beyond a thin veil. The scent of salt shifted, replaced by something sharper, clean and crisp and tinged with snow. Theo's expression brightened with scholarly satisfaction. He adjusted one sleeve, as though ensuring the symmetry of the moment, and allowed the spell to settle into stable brilliance. "You see," he murmured, though whether to Silas or to himself was unclear. "Precision and patience." Silas flexed his gloved fingers, eyeing the portal with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but beauty, in his experience, often carried sharp edges. He rolled his shoulders once, as if preparing for a plunge into cold water. "After you," he suggested lightly. Theo smiled, a curve of confidence and quiet pride. "Shall we?" Silas took one steady breath and stepped forward. The world turned white, then softer white, then very, very cold white. The brightness was not blinding, but enveloping, like falling into a cloud made of snowlight. The air struck his lungs with crystalline sharpness. Sound vanished, replaced by a vast and muffled stillness. For a moment, there was no harbour, no gulls, no creaking docks, only endless pale and the sensation of drifting through something impossibly gentle and impossibly frigid. When his boots found solid ground again, they sank slightly. Snow, fresh and powdery. It rose in delicate puffs around his ankles, whispering at the slightest movement. Above him stretched a sky the colour of frosted glass, and beneath it rolled hills of untouched white, soft as folded linen. Sparse trees dotted the landscape, their branches etched in ice, each twig sparkling faintly in muted light. Silas blinked, breath fogging before him in startled clouds. This was not Shipwreck Cove. There was no scent of brine, no crash of distant waves. Only the hush of winter, deep and complete. Behind him, the portal snapped shut with a gentle chime, like the closing note of a song. Silas stood very still, listening to the enormous quiet. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a sky that had not looked so heavy a moment ago. They settled on his burgundy coat, clinging briefly before melting into darkened velvet. He exhaled slowly, the sound small against the wide expanse. Somewhere nearby, he heard Theo clear his throat with composed dignity. And though the cold bit at his cheeks and crept curiously down his collar, Silas felt the first stirrings of something unexpected, an adventure not of gold and glittering hoards, but of warm fires found in unlikely places, of companionship tested gently by frost, and of magic that rarely delivers exactly what one intends. The snow continued to fall, soft and unhurried, as if the world itself were inviting them to begin again. When sensation returned, it arrived as a quiet hush. Silas lay in snow so soft it muffled every sound, as though the world had been wrapped in wool. Above him stretched a sky the colour of pearl grey silk, smooth and unbroken from horizon to horizon. Snow drifted lazily downward, each flake wandering as though it had nowhere particular to be, turning slowly in the air before settling with feather-light certainty. For a long, suspended moment, he did not move. He simply listened to the silence, to the faint whisper of falling snow, to the steady rhythm of his own breath. He sat up slowly. The horizon was endless. Snow rolled in gentle dunes across a vast expanse of pale light, rising and falling in soft curves that resembled a sleeping sea. No trees interrupted the view. No cliffs cut the skyline. No sign of ocean shimmered in the distance. Only winter in its purest form, calm, quiet, patient. The land seemed less a place and more an idea, as though someone had imagined snow and made it stretch infinitely in every direction. Theo stirred nearby, rising carefully to his feet. His robes fluttered lightly in the wind, pale fabric rippling against the white like a banner of frost. For once, he did not speak immediately. His eyes moved across the landscape in slow realization, taking in the absence of everything they had intended to find. His posture remained composed, but the faint narrowing of his gaze betrayed calculation, adjustment, reconsideration. "This," he said at last softly, "is not Shipwreck Cove." Silas brushed snow from his coat, shaking it from velvet sleeves and patting it from his shoulders. His voice when he spoke was surprisingly calm, steady as the tide he had watched only moments ago. "No, I believe we have mislaid the ocean." The words drifted between them without accusation. There was no panic in the air, only cold, a deep, thoughtful cold that crept gently through cloth and leather, settling into seams and stitching with patient persistence. It did not bite sharply. It simply remained like an unwelcome but polite guest. Theo extended his hand and attempted a small warming charm. A faint glow sparked between his fingers, pale gold against the white world. For an instant, it flickered with promise, casting a delicate halo of light upon the snow. Then it dimmed and went out like a candle in wind, leaving only a thin curl of silver smoke. He frowned, not in frustration, but in curiosity. The magic here felt muted, not hostile, not broken, simply distant, as though resting beneath the surface of things, as if the land itself preferred stillness over spectacle. Silas exhaled slowly, watching the cloud of his breath bloom and fade. "We'll move," he said evenly. "Warm ourselves by walking. Shelter is always somewhere." There was something reassuring in the simplicity of the plan. No grand incantations, no heroic declarations, just movement, step after step, through whatever the world had chosen to offer. So they began to walk. Their boots pressed soft trails into powdery drifts, leaving twin paths that curved gently behind them. The snow did not resist. It yielded with quiet compliance, parting beneath their weight and settling again as though amused by their presence. Each step made a muted crunch, softened immediately by the endless hush. Time slowed. The wind hummed low and steady, not sharp enough to sting, but constant enough to remind them that they were small figures in a vast white expanse. Snow continued its lazy descent, collecting on Theo's shoulders, catching in Silas's dark hair, frosting lashes and hems alike. Each breath became a rhythm. Inhale, exhale, step, step. There was no measure of distance here. Without landmarks, the world felt suspended, like walking across the inside of a cloud. Eventually, as though conjured by the sheer persistence of motion, two shapes appeared ahead, large and grey against the pale field. At first, they were little more than shadows, subtle variations in tone against the snow. But as Silas narrowed his eyes, the shapes gained form and solidity. They stood half hidden in snowbanks, watching. Great wolf-like forms emerged with unhurried grace. Their fur was thick as winter blankets, layered in shades of silver and ash that blended seamlessly with their surroundings. Snow clung to their backs without melting. Their eyes shone a clear glacial blue, bright, intelligent, and curiously calm. Silas stilled. Theo did the same. The wolves regarded them in silence. No growl disturbed the air. No hackles rose. They simply stood, breath steaming faintly, tails held level and relaxed. Then one trotted forward. Its movement was fluid and confident, paws pressing lightly into the snow. Its tail swept in broad arcs behind it, scattering powder in gentle bursts. It stopped a few paces away and tilted its head, studying Silas with open curiosity. Then, quite unexpectedly, it offered its paw. Theo blinked. Silas let out a soft laugh that turned to warm mist in the air. "Well," he murmured, kneeling carefully, mindful of sudden movements. "That's friendly enough." He reached out slowly and took the offered paw in his gloved hand. The creature's fur was thick and warm beneath his fingers, surprisingly solid, reassuringly real. The wolf huffed softly, as if pleased by the exchange. The second wolf bounded closer with playful enthusiasm, circling Theo before nudging insistently at his hand. The elf stiffened at first, then awkwardly obliged, scratching behind the creature's ears with scholarly uncertainty. The wolf leaned into the touch with obvious satisfaction, tail wagging in sweeping arcs that sent snow flying like thrown feathers. Their tails moved in broad, joyous motions, and the vast white world seemed, for the first time, to contain something lively. Not wolves then, or perhaps wolves who had chosen companionship over wildness. There was no hunger in their gaze, no threat in their stance, only invitation. The larger of the two barked once, a deep, resonant sound that rolled softly across the snow. Then it turned and began trotting away, pausing after several steps to glance back, ears perked expectantly. Silas rose slowly, brushing snow from his knees. He met Theo's eyes. Theo, ever composed, inclined his head with quiet acceptance. "Guides," he said thoughtfully. "Or at the very least, neighbours." Silas smiled faintly. "I've always preferred good neighbours to good maps." The wolf barked again, softer this time, as though urging them along. And so they followed. Their new companions moved easily across the drifts, barely sinking where Silas and Theo left deeper impressions. The snow seemed to part for them, acknowledging their familiarity with this quiet realm. Every few steps, one of the creatures glanced back to ensure they were still close behind, blue eyes bright against the white. The endless horizon no longer felt quite so empty. There was movement now, direction. A sense, however subtle, that winter itself had noticed their arrival and chosen not indifference, but welcome. And beneath the pale silk sky, with snow falling in patient spirals and two great silver shapes leading the way, Silas and Theo walked onward into the hush, toward whatever warmth waited beyond the dunes of white. The wolves led them across gentle slopes until, quite gradually, shapes began to rise beneath the snow. At first, it seemed like nothing more than drifted stone, soft mounds shaped by wind and time, subtle variations in the otherwise endless white. But as they drew nearer, edges began to sharpen. Angles emerged where curves had been. Lines cut cleanly through the snow's smooth surface. Timber beams revealed themselves in dark, deliberate strokes against the pale landscape, their corners peeking through frost like patient sentinels. Carved archways appeared next, half buried yet unmistakable, their craftsmanship too precise to be natural. Snow clung to their upper curves, outlining intricate patterns etched long ago into stone. What had once seemed an empty expanse was, in truth, a place waiting to be noticed. A door revealed itself as a gentle shift of wind sent snow sliding from its surface. A sturdy wooden door bound in iron bands, its hinges thick and hand-forged. It stood firm within a stone frame carved directly from the mountain's heart. A faint glow traced its edges, warm amber light slipping through the seams, as though the interior refused to be entirely hidden. The wolves padded forward without hesitation. The door opened before they could knock. A dwarf woman stood framed in golden light, bundled in layered furs the color of toasted chestnut and winter pine. Her cheeks were rosy from hearth warmth, her broad shoulders wrapped in a woven shawl patterned with mountain sigils. She regarded them with amused patience, as though wayward travelers appearing from snowstorms were a familiar occurrence. "You're a bit off course," she said warmly, her voice rich and steady as oak. "Best come inside." The invitation required no repetition. The warmth that greeted them was not overwhelming, not the sudden blast of heat that steals breath. It was steady, patient warmth, radiating upward through stone floors and along timber beams carved directly from the mountain itself. It seeped into boots and gloves, into tired fingers and stiff shoulders, coaxing sensation back with gentle insistence. The entry hall glowed with lantern light suspended from iron hooks, each flame contained within glass, etched with subtle frost patterns. Snow melted softly from their boots, trickling into narrow stone drains carved neatly into the floor. The sound was faint and pleasant, like the smallest stream beginning its journey. The wolves shook themselves once and padded past them without ceremony, entirely at home. "Welcome," the dwarf said, unwinding her scarf in practiced motions. Copper hair spilled free in thick braids that fell over her shoulders, woven through with thin silver beads that caught the firelight. "I'm Greta. This is Frost Peak Lodge." Inside, the world transformed. The ceilings arched high above them, supported by polished stone pillars left from the mountain itself, shaped rather than replaced. The craftsmanship respected the rock's natural form. Curves and ridges remained visible, as though the lodge had grown rather than been built. Firelight danced along granite walls, casting soft shadows that shifted like slow-moving stories. Enchanted windows set into the stone revealed the snowfall outside, as though it were a silent painting, each flake suspended in gentle descent, the glass subtly warm to prevent frost from obscuring the view. Beyond the panes, winter continued its quiet dominion, but within these walls, it felt distant and almost tender. Woven rugs lay thick beneath their boots once they removed them, intricate patterns in deep blues and warm reds, soft beneath bare feet. Benches lined the walls, cushioned in dense wool and led with hand-stitched quilts. A central fire pit crackled with deep amber flame, its heat steady and grounding. Sparks rose lazily toward a vented chimney carved seamlessly into the ceiling. Voices murmured in gentle conversation nearby. Laughter rose and fell like distant music, warm and unhurried. The scent of wood smoke mingled with herbs and something savory simmering deeper within the lodge. Greta guided them down a wide corridor toward the infirmary, her boots striking stone with confident rhythm. The air there was fragrant with eucalyptus and mountain sage. Warming blankets were draped around their shoulders, thick, weighted, reassuring. Herbal steam drifted from a copper basin in the corner, curling upward in soft spirals. Brunhild, the lodge healer, met them with calm efficiency. She was older, her dark hair streaked with silver and pulled into a practical knot. Her hands were steady and gentle as she examined their fingers and cheeks, pressing lightly to check circulation, nodding with quiet approval. "You've arrived in time," she said kindly, her voice low and even. "The mountain prefers patience, but she rewards those who listen." Silas found himself smiling faintly at that. Soup arrived soon after, thick and fragrant, served in sturdy stone bowls that retained their heat. Steam rose in comforting clouds, carrying the scent of roasted root vegetables, garlic, and slow-simmered broth. Bread accompanied it, crusty and golden. When broken open, it released a fresh wave of warmth, butter melting instantly against its soft interior. They ate slowly. With each spoonful, sensation returned more fully. The cold retreated from their bones, replaced by a spreading warmth that felt less like heat and more like restoration. Fingers flexed more easily. Shoulders relaxed. Breath came deeper and steadier. Later, one's strength returned and the world no longer felt edged in frost. Greta offered them a quiet tour. "There's no rush here," she explained as they walked. "Winter moves at its own pace." She led them through corridors carved in elegant arcs, lanterns spaced evenly along the walls. There were hot springs nestled within natural caverns, steam rising in soft curls toward lantern-lit ceilings. The pools shimmered with mineral light, their surfaces gently rippling. Stone benches lined the water's edge, smoothed by generations of guests who had rested there, letting the mountain's warmth seep into weary limbs. There was a dining hall beyond, long tables carved from single slabs of timber, polished smooth. The air there carried the scent of roasted root vegetables, baked apples, and cinnamon wine warming over a slow flame. Candles flickered in iron holders shaped like curling branches, their light soft and inviting. Greta guided them higher still, up winding steps that led to terraces carved along the mountain's edge. From there, the world opened wide. Snow stretched outward in endless folds, but above, the sky shimmered. "On clear nights," Greta said quietly, "you'll see them." As if summoned by her words, faint ribbons of green and violet began to ripple across the darkening sky, subtle at first, then brighter. The aurora shimmered like silk caught in a gentle current, weaving and unfurling in luminous arcs. It cast a soft glow upon the snow below, transforming the white landscape into something otherworldly. Silas exhaled slowly, watching the colors shift. "And beyond the tunnels," Greta continued, "the slopes." She gestured toward broad, gentle descents carved naturally by wind and time. Guests could be seen gliding down snowfields on polished wooden boards, bundled in bright scarves and laughing freely. The sound carried upward on winter air, light-hearted, unburdened. Theo paused often throughout the tour, his fingers brushing stone surfaces, his keen eyes studying the subtle enchantments woven through the lodge's foundation. He could feel them, not flashy or proud spells, not the kind that flared with spectacle. These were steady, practical magics, warming wards embedded deep within stone, structural harmonies that strengthened beams without visible strain, enchantments woven like threads in a tapestry, designed to support rather than impress. "They're integrated," he murmured softly, admiration threading through his tone. "Part of the architecture, not layered atop it." Greta smiled knowingly. "Magic should serve the hearth," she replied, "not demand applause." Silas, meanwhile, found himself drifting back toward the central fire pit once the tour concluded. He sank onto a cushioned bench, elbows resting loosely on his knees, watching sparks rise and fade into the chimney's dark throat. Around him, travellers shared stories in low voices. A pair of dwarven children darted past with woolen scarves trailing behind them. One of the great wolf-like companions curled near the hearth, eyes half-lidded in contentment. Treasure, he thought, could look many ways. Not always gold stacked beneath stone arches. Not always glittering coins or jeweled crowns. Sometimes treasure was warmth that met you at the door without question. Sometimes it was soup and steady hands and laughter carried gently through carved halls. Sometimes it was being a bit off course and discovering you had arrived exactly where you were meant to be. That evening, the storm outside deepened. Snow whispered against the enchanted windows in soft, steady strokes, like fingertips brushing glass. The wind moved along the mountain ridges with a low, resonant hum, neither angry nor violent, but vast and ancient. It carried the voice of winter across stone and snowfield, a lullaby sung in tones too deep to be hurried. Now and then a stronger gust curled around the lodge's outer walls, but the structure did not so much as tremble. It stood rooted and certain, as though it had been waiting for this storm all along. Within the lodge, warmth gathered. It pooled beneath arched ceilings and settled into wool rugs and timber beams. It lingered in the air like a gentle embrace. Lanterns cast halos of golden light that softened every edge, and the central fire pit burned with a steady amber glow, flames rising and folding inward with calm assurance. Guests drifted gradually toward the hearth as twilight deepened. Chairs and cushioned benches were arranged in loose circles, forming small islands of conversation. Some travellers cradled mugs of spiced cider, steam curling upward in fragrant spirals of cinnamon and clove. Others leaned close together, exchanging stories in low voices, tales of distant markets, long caravan roads, frozen rivers crossed at dawn. Laughter surfaced now and again, warm and unguarded, before dissolving into the gentle murmur of the room. Svetlana and Smidge, the great winter dogs, curled near the hearth, their thick silver-grey coats reflecting flickers of firelight. One rested her chin on broad paws, eyes half closed in contentment. The other lay on her side, breathing slow and even, tail occasionally thumping softly against the rug, as dreams carried her somewhere bright and boundless. Their presence felt less like guardianship and more like companionship, steady, reassuring. Silas and Theo sat side by side on a low bench carved from polished stone, wrapped in fresh wool cloaks gifted by Greta. The fabric was dense and comforting. dyed in deep forest green and trimmed with subtle mountain embroidery. The cloaks carried the faint scent of cedar and hearth smoke, as though they had been stored carefully for just such arrivals. For a long time, neither spoke. The crackle of fire filled the silence. Wood shifted and settled in glowing embers. Sparks rose lazily, spiraling upward before vanishing into the chimney's shadowed throat. The rhythm was hypnotic, grounding. Theo stared into the flames, hands loosely clasped, fingers illuminated in shifting gold. His posture, so often impeccable and upright, had softened. The tension that had accompanied him since the failed portal seemed to loosen with each measured breath. "I miscalculated," he said at last, his voice thoughtful and low, nearly blending with the fire's murmur. Silas glanced at him, but offered no immediate reply. He merely adjusted his position, stretching his boots a little closer to the warmth, the leather catching a faint gleam from the flames. "I was certain," Theo continued, gaze still fixed on the dancing light. "Certain of my precision. The runes were exact, the coordinates precise. I believed mastery meant infallibility." His tone carried no bitterness, only contemplation. "I have spent years refining my craft to avoid error, to anticipate every variable." The firelight reflected in his pale eyes, turning them molten gold for a fleeting moment. Silas leaned back slightly, shoulders settling against the stone wall behind him. He watched a log collapse gently inward, sending a shower of sparks upward. "Mastery," he said quietly, "might simply mean knowing when to accept the unexpected." Theo's brow shifted faintly at that, not in disagreement, but in reflection. Around them, the lodge hummed softly, conversations blending into a kind of gentle background music. At the far wall, a dwarf musician sat on a carved stool, plucking a stringed instrument shaped from pale wood. The melody was low and soothing, each note deliberate, echoing warmly against stone. It threaded through the air like woven silk, binding disparate voices into harmony. Outside, the storm howled more fiercely now. Snow struck the windows in the heavier flurries, and wind traced the mountain's contours with rising intensity. Yet the enchanted glass held steady, revealing only swirling white and shifting shadow beyond. From within, the storm seemed distant, almost abstract, a reminder of the vastness outside rather than a threat. Inside there was only glow. Theo exhaled slowly, the sound nearly lost beneath the music and fire. For the first time since stepping through the portal, his shoulders lowered fully. The rigid line of expectation softened into something more human, more open. "I have always measured success by accuracy," he said after a pause. "Arrival at the intended destination, fulfillment of precise intention." He tilted his head slightly, watching flame curl around ember. "And yet we arrived somewhere else entirely." Silas's gaze drifted towards Svetlana and Smidge, who had shifted closer to the hearth, their thick fur illuminated in bronze highlights. One ear flicked lazily at the musician's melody. "And found warmth," Silas added. Theo's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but close. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we were meant to miscalculate." The words did not carry resignation, they carried discovery. Silas smiled faintly, eyes half-lidded, as he absorbed the rhythm of the room, the murmur of conversation, the steady breathing of those nearby, the soft thud of snow against stone. "Shipwreck Cove will still be there tomorrow," he said. "Gold doesn't wander off." Theo allowed himself a quiet huff of amusement. One hopes not. The musician shifted into a new melody, slightly brighter but still gentle. Somewhere behind them, a pair of travellers raised their mugs in quiet toast. Greta passed through the room carrying a tray of fresh bread, her copper braids glinting in lantern light. She paused briefly near the fire to check the logs, nodding in quiet satisfaction before moving on. The wolves adjusted again, settling nearer to Silas's boots. Smidge rested her head lightly against his ankle, warmth radiating through leather and wool. He absently scratched behind her ear, earning a contented sigh. For a while, words felt unnecessary. Flame and snowfall set the rhythm. The storm outside surged and softened in waves, but within the lodge, time seemed to stretch comfortably. No one hurried. No one counted hours. Theo leaned back at last, allowing the warmth to seep into him fully. "There is a kind of elegance in this place," he murmured. "Magic woven into structure. Strength without spectacle." Silas nodded once. "Treasure," he said quietly, "has a habit of changing shape." Theo glanced at him, understanding flickering there. Outside, winter sang against stone. Inside, breath moved in slow harmony with the fire's glow. The wolves shifted closer still, forming a circle of living warmth at their feet. And for a while, they simply sat, breathing in rhythm with flame and snowfall, no longer concerned with miscalculation or missed coordinates, content in the quiet certainty that sometimes the wrong door opens to exactly the right hearth. Night deepened. One by one, guests drifted toward their chambers, their conversations tapering into soft goodnights and lingering smiles. Lanterns along the corridors were dimmed to a mellow amber hush, their glow reduced to gentle halos that guided the way without disturbing the calm. The musician's final notes faded into the stone, leaving behind a quiet so complete it felt almost sacred. Footsteps softened against woven rugs. Doors closed with muted clicks. The lodge exhaled. Silas stood on one of the upper terraces before bed, hands resting lightly against the carved stone railing. Beyond him, the storm continued its patient dance. Snow swirled in wide, graceful arcs beneath starlight that had begun to pierce the thinning clouds. The sky above was no longer a uniform grey, but a shifting canvas of depth and distance, constellations glimmering faintly between drifting veils of white. The air was cold, yes, but no longer biting, no longer sharp with uncertainty. It felt expansive, honest, a reminder of the mountain's vastness rather than a threat to endure. Theo joined him quietly, cloak wrapped close around his shoulders. The wool caught the faint light, its embroidered edges glinting subtly. He stepped beside Silas without comment, gaze lifting toward the heavens, as though reading a familiar but ever-changing text. Far above, the aurora began to shimmer. At first, it was little more than a faint glow along the horizon, a soft suggestion of color where darkness met sky. Then thin ribbons of pale green unfurled slowly across the heavens, delicate as silk drawn through careful fingers. Hints of violet followed, weaving between the green in quiet harmony. The lights rippled and curved, folding over themselves in patient waves, luminous yet gentle. Neither spoke. There are moments when language feels unnecessary, when presence alone is enough. The wind moved softly around them, tugging at cloak edges and stirring loose strands of hair. Snow continued its descent, each flake catching faint light before dissolving into the slopes below. The cold no longer felt threatening. It felt vast and beautiful, safely observed from warmth. A thing to admire rather than resist. Theo exhaled slowly, breath turning to silver mist. There was no tension in him now, no restless calculation. Only quiet acknowledgement. After a while, minutes or perhaps longer, they turned and returned inside. The corridors of Frost Peak Lodge were hushed, lantern light glowing low against carved stone. The warmth met them again with gentle familiarity, like an old friend who never questions your return. Somewhere distant, a log shifted in the main hearth with a soft crackle. The steady hum of the mountain lingered beneath it all, a resonance so subtle it could almost be mistaken for imagination. Their guest chamber was simple but perfect. 2 broad beds stood opposite one another, each layered with heavy quilts stitched in geometric mountain patterns. The fabric was thick and inviting, promising warmth that would not waver through the night. A small hearth glowed low in the corner, embers radiating steady heat that filled the room without smoke or strain. Above it hung a modest mantle carved with quiet craftsmanship. No grand flourishes, just patient skill. Frost patterned delicately along the window's edge, crystalline shapes branching outward like lace spun from ice. The lamplight caught those patterns and turned them into tiny constellations, mirroring the sky outside in miniature. Silas lay back first, boots removed, cloak folded neatly over the foot of the bed. He settled into the mattress with a contented sigh, hands folding behind his head for a moment as he stared at the ceiling's carved beams. The day replayed gently in his thoughts, not as a list of events, but as impressions. Snow, wolves, soup, firelight. Theo moved about the room with quiet precision, adjusting the hearth slightly, ensuring the shutters were secured against the wind. When he reached for the lamp, he paused only briefly before whispering a soft word of magic. This time, the spell responded easily. The flame dimmed at once, shrinking to a delicate ember before extinguishing entirely. No flicker of resistance, no faltering spark. The magic felt cooperative, as though the mountain had decided he'd learned enough for one day, and granted him this small acknowledgement. Darkness settled, warm and complete. Outside, snow continued its patient fall, brushing against stone and timber in soft repetition. The storm had gentled, its earlier urgency replaced by steady persistence. It would likely continue through the night, layering the slopes in fresh white silence. Inside, breath slowed. The hearth's embers pulsed faintly, casting a low amber glow that traced the outline of furniture and quilt. The room felt cocooned within the mountain, wrapped in stone older than memory. And somewhere deep within Frost Peak Lodge, beneath corridors and chambers and carved halls, the steady heart of the mountain hummed, a low, comforting resonance that vibrated through bed frames and beams alike. It was not a sound heard with ears, but felt in bone and breath, a reminder that the world, even in winter, holds warmth at its core. Treasure, Silas thought drowsily, did not always glitter. Sometimes it glowed. Sometimes it steamed gently from a hot spring carved into ancient rock. Sometimes it arrived disguised as a misstep, a portal turned slightly askew, a destination misplaced. He shifted beneath the quilt, warmth settling fully into his limbs. The search for pirate gold felt distant now, almost quaint. There would be time for that, for maps and coordinates and careful incantations. Beside him, Theo's breathing evened into quiet rest. each inhale slow and measured, each exhale soft. The weight of perfection had loosened its grip, replaced by something steadier. Acceptance, perhaps, or trust. In the lower halls, Svetlana and Smidge slept near the great hearth, their thick fur rising and falling in unison. Occasionally one paw twitched in dream, chasing something unseen across snowy fields that existed only in memory. Snow fell. The fire softened. The aurora beyond the clouds continued its silent dance, unseen now but still present, weaving color across darkness. And within the mountain, wrapped in warmth and gentle winter hush, two travelers drifted into the kind of sleep that comes only after finding shelter where none was expected. The kind of sleep earned not through conquest, but through surrender to what is given. Rest now, dear adventurer. Let your thoughts settle like snow upon quiet slopes. Let the warmth you have gathered remain with you. The snow will continue to fall, and the hearth will keep its glow. Good night from Serene Slumber Tales.